In 1933, Argentina decided to intervene in the Chaco War between Bolivia and Paraguay. From this intervention, Paraguay was saved, and Argentina started to advance into Bolivia itself. However, this drew the response of the Brazilian government. America's sleeping giant decided that this war would be easy for them. However, after a quick advance towards the capital of Buenos Aires, Argentina managed to turn the war around. They first defeated Bolivia's armed forces, and then turned around and counterattacked against Brazil, quickly forcing them back towards their heartlands. From the peace treaty that was signed, not only did Brazil have to give up some humiliating reparations and territory, but Argentina managed to unite Paraguay, Uruguay, and Argentina into the La Plata Union, or the Union of the River Plate. Now Brazil is a defeated country, with much work to do before it can recover. Welcome back everyone to another Kaiserreich country overview. This time it's going to be Brazil, as you can see. Brazil is a very, very interesting little place, and it's got a lot of problems. First and foremost, as mentioned, the southern menace, La Plata. Having just lost, essentially a year ago, the Great South American War to La Plata, Brazil's military and politics are in complete disarray. However, it's also got bigger problems. In our timeline, in 1930, a sort of coup revolution happened that essentially destroyed the old system of running things that we're going to explain. However, in Kaiserreich, this hasn't actually happened yet. Now, well, didn't really completely destroy it, but it mostly overhauled it. So, what I'm talking about is the role of the old Brazilian Republic, which is what we right now are looking over. The Brazilian Republic had some problems. The system of political sort of establishment was very much focused around landowners, paternalistic politics, corruption, and personal power bases. So it was essentially very corrupt, and landowners dominated mostly the local power structures. The government was very decentralized, so what you have is a very disunited state. So it's kind of explained over here. What it ended up being called, there's two names for it. There's coronelismo, that being oligarchic rule, and mostly within coronelismo, the most important, I guess, aspect was called coffee with milk, café con leite. That is because essentially the two main economic interests that governed this society, this political system, were the coffee plantations around Sao Paulo and Rio de Janeiro, and in Minas Gerais up here, the milk or dairy industry, so coffee with milk. And these were the two primary economic interests, again, that really ruled in Brazil at the time. The problem was that, of course, with the turn of the century and essentially the growth of industrial society in Brazil, you have a lot of different types of social changes that make this kind of doctrine untenable, because at one point it's simply impossible to just gather up all the economic interests of the country within these two groups, no matter how dominant they may have been. With the growth of industry in the coastal cities of Sao Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, Porto Alegre, and with the major discontent in the northeast rural regions, you have that this kind of a situation is just impossible to hold. So the old political institutions are in big trouble. And at this point, compounded by the fact that the army lost the major war against La Plata, it's essentially inevitable that some kind of civil war will happen. Now, the main, I guess, main power base in Brazil will be decided by who wins the elections that you get after a few months of being in the game. And the main factions are these four. As you can see, the civil war is inevitable. It will happen sometime after the elections, depending on your choices. And it's very much dependent on the choices that you make in events that are Some of them are common to all the factions. Some of them are custom to each of them, which is why all of these four do kind of feel different. The four main factions are the Liberal Democratic Coalition, which is Social Liberal, Liberal Democratas. By the way, I will mispronounce every Portuguese name ever. You will, I believe you will have the option of choosing the Republicans, aka the Conservatives. Well, these Republicans, the Partido Republicano Riograndense, the Conservatives, in successive elections, but not in the first one. The first one will turn you over to Social Liberal, and that's just a democratic path, so you maintain exactly what this looks like. Then you have Vargas Victorious. Vargas is a politician of the Republican movement, and the Republican movement is, well, it's mostly focused around the northeastern rural support. Essentially, this region and its oligarchs are very resentful of the main power players in the south. So this kind of region will support you greatly, and it's also one of the main, I guess, candidates that are supported by the industrialists. So what you have is that you are trying to build this new state, the Estado Novo, which is, I guess, the historical path of Brazil that they took in real life. Essentially, in the 1930 revolution, Vargas ended up essentially coupping the government, taking over, and becoming the, I guess you could say, dictator of Brazil. Initially, he ruled by constitutional grants, but then eventually he managed to concentrate all state power within his clique and himself, and he managed to fabricate this Plan Cohen, which would be a, well, in Kaiserreich it is a syndicalist coup attempt that's fabricated entirely, but in our timeline it was supposed to be a communist takeover. This was in 1937, and eventually established the Estado Novo, or a just one-party dictatorship. Then the other two are also pretty interesting. You have the ANL and the AIB. The ANL is the syndicalists. They are the alliance of essentially all of the radical left-wing organizations in Brazil, from the Communist Party, which is relatively small, to the trade unions. There's a couple of big ones, and the Social Revolutionary Party, which is another big party that is right now in 1936 growing in Brazil. Not to be confused with another Social Revolutionary Party. Yeah. And these are the essentially just taken over and combined in the Aliança Nacional Libertadora, or the Libertarian National Alliance. Libertarian is not used in the American sense of the word. In the American sense of the word, it is supposed to be libertarianism, the freedom of the market. In European and South American terms, libertarian means, I guess you could say, a left-wing doctrine that is, well, so sometimes you could say that some communists are libertarians. Sometimes you could say that some populist left-wingers are libertarian. Essentially, it's just a political doctrine that wants to establish a socialist, or I guess false socialist, or whatever you can come up with, society that is still very, very much upholding the freedom of the individual and all of that. And initially was formed as a response to the events of the Soviet Union and all of that. So this is what this is about. And once you go down this line, you do have some interesting options that we'll get to later in the other parts of the focus stream, because these are very, very much focused on what you end up doing with your politics. So that's why I'm going with the politics first. That's also because I think that they're most interesting. And then you have the AIB, the Ação Integralista Brasileira, so the Brazilian Integralist Action, I guess. Like Ação would be action, I think. I don't know. They are the National Populists, and they follow the integralist ideology, which in Kaiserreich, it has taken over Portugal. And so if you guys want to kind of hear more about the integralists in the ideological department, I guess you could head down to my Portugal overview video. I don't know. I feel like that would be a good idea. Anyway, what the integralist ideology preaches is that there should be a unity within the state and the larger population, so that you can, and also there should be a unity of essentially everything that is making up the nation as a whole. So not just the people, the government, you know, the intellectuals and all that, but also, for example, religion, and of course, the main financial establishment and the industrial sector. So you have this kind of corporatist setup. And what you can do with the integralists is that you can come down here, and another movement that you can recruit to your aid is a sort of Catholic restoration movement called the Patriotistas. And this Catholic restoration movement wants to restore the Empire of Brazil, which has gone down the drain, of course. And you can restore the empire after you've destroyed Argentina or La Plata. And essentially, you can either accept their support, and they do give you some pretty good bonuses, so I suggest you do so. And after that, you can go down this faith and state line, again, reinforcing the cooperation between the Catholic Church and the new integralist state. And of course, you can also restore the Brazilian Empire after you've gone down and defeated La Plata. Another option that you have is just to try to get some extra bonuses for the Republic of Brazil. And yeah, none of these are particularly stronger than the others. They do have some interesting purge mechanics with reduction of army experience. I guess this is a little bit less extreme than some of the other purges that are going around. They don't cause civil wars and all of that. It's just a tiny purge of political opponents. And the reason that this is happening with the army and all of these civil war focuses have something that relates to the army. The reason that this is relating to the army is that there is a movement called the Tenentismo, or Tenentistas, being the lieutenants of the army, because I believe Tenente means lieutenant, who are very, very much involved in the national politics, and they will be involved in how the new government is created. They will be involved if somebody tries to take over your government with a coup. For some reason here they're depicted as an authoritarian Democrat movement, even though in real life they were mostly left-wing. And again, they represented the interests of those who were disaffected by the, I guess, establishment of the Café con Leite doctrine. So those who were opposed to the oligarchy of the main sort of southern states, they were generally, though, again, confined within the army. There was an uprising in 1922 that involved them, and they were also involved in 1930 in real life. I'm right now just speaking about what's going on in real life. They were also involved in the 1930 coup, and then later some of them ended up supporting Vargas, but also some of them ended up trying to bring Brazil over to the communism. But in this Kaiserreich timeline, you can have the Tenentistas support you as the AIB, you can have them support you as the ANL, you can have them supporting you as as Vargas, and you can have them supporting you as the Democrats. And I'll show you right now the election event so that you can understand what's going on. Let's come down here, Brazilian elections. As you saw, I was playing a game as the integralist just to, I guess, brush up. And there we are. So here are the four choices. You have the ANL, whose leader is Edgar Loyenroff, definitely a very Brazilian name. Historically in Brazil, the left-wing organizations were very much supported by the substantial immigrant population, mostly Southern Europeans, especially Italians and Spanish and Portuguese, but also quite a few Germans. And yeah, so they were very much supporters. Mostly of those supporters were coming in from, again, immigrant worker populations around southern cities. And also a lot of anarchist supporters were coming from there. Famously, Italian immigrants were essentially the exporters of terrorism to the Americas. So, yeah. Let's take, for example, the Alianza Nacional Libertadora. So the ANL. We turn into the United Communes of Brazil, showcasing a new government structure. But what you have is that, of course, you have to set up a government. And to set up a government, because the politics are so divided, in the election you don't really have enough to form a majority. You can either try to take over and say the syndicalist movement needs no alliances. You can invite the left-wing tenentes into the ANL, which gains you Luis Carlos Prestes, who is an interesting historical figure, as your head of government. Anyway, the tenentes generally are a government that, as you can see, are more focused on the military side of things. As you could expect, these are army officers, young army officers. And you can also ask for support from the Liberal Democrats. Don't do that, that's for pussies. So if you choose this, you're going to have an option between the three main parties that are, or organizations that are making up the ANL, those being the BOC, the CBT. These two are trade unions, and then the PSR, the Socialist Revolutionary Party. I'm not going to take it right now because, again, it's just a change for your ministers. Nothing really too particular. If we go back to the election screen, I'm just going to select someone else to kind of show you. For example, the Republicans. Actually, no, I'm going to show you everybody. The Liberal Democrats, you have the option of coalitioning with the center tenentes, so the moderates. You can invite Getulio Vargas in to be your head of government, or you can say our coalition needs no alliances, and then with this you can choose your partners in crime. You have the Paulista Washington Luis. These are conservatives. Then you have Olimpio de Melo, who is just a liberal ally, as far as I know. And then you have Borges de Medeiros, who is a more, I guess, connected with the sort of city establishment kind of character. He's social liberal. And again, these are just kind of the same. And your head of government is Julio Prestes, not to be confused with Carlos Prestes. There's two Presteses running around. With the Vargas people, the Republicans, I'll show you. You also have some Tenente support, as with everybody else. The right-wing Tenetistas. And again, they're more focused on the military side of things. And you can have a deal with the integralists as well. Or you can say, do nothing, we can run everything by ourselves. And you can have some of your allies coming in. In fact, one of them is an army leader, Dutra. Wait, this is the same guy from the Tenentes. Right, anyway, weird politics aside. The last option is, of course, taking over as the integralists, which is quite an interesting path. It does have a lot of events. Overall, I think that, well, from what I've played, the two most developed paths are the ones for the AIB and the one for the ANL. Those are the two most interesting. And they're the ones that give you the most events with the most flavor. Although the AIB does have some weird problems, for example. Well, I'll show you later. Alright, with the integralists, you can have the hardline tenentes, the hardline, the right-wingers, deal with Getulio Vargas, or say the integralists will take the government alone, and you have two candidates. One of them is the ideologue, Gustavo Barroso, who is like, I guess you could say, he's a little bit like the Rudolf Hess of the integralists. Like, he's the guy that, does the dirty work, and yeah, he's also kind of an ideologue. Anyway, the other guy is Euclides Figueiredo, who is an army figure. And of course, you can just improve your army that way. So as you can see, lots of army involvement in politics. Now, no matter which... Are we talking about this one? Yes, we are. No matter which alliance you choose, you're going to have something like this happen. You're going to have some opponent of yours attempt a coup. For example, for the integralists, it's usually Luis Carlos Prestes, aka the left-wing tenentista. And you can either say, well, the coup succeeds, and if you do that, you turn into the United Communes, which is still going to trigger a civil war, I believe. But, you know, you can switch around to somebody else, which is, I guess, fine. Or if you take disperse the rebels, of course, the presidential guard will disperse the city scum, or, you know, the whatever variety of things you have. You're gonna have, oops, revolution, he launches an uprising, and a civil war. And this is gonna happen with every option that you have taken in the elections. So it's relatively railroaded in that sense, but it's kind of, I guess, necessary if you want, you know, this whole path. So after that, you just bypass this, and you can take, after you win the Civil War, you can take whatever path you're going down. Once you're finished, you're gonna have, do I have this anywhere? No, I probably don't. Anyway, once you're finished, you're gonna have the option of taking the revanche focus. You know, I probably should not have loaded up this save. All right. Okay. So now you have a government, and once you're done with this, you're going to be able to take the revanche focus, which gives you the annex war goal against La Plata. That is your main objective, to take down La Plata. Once it's done, and it's relatively easy considering that Brazil's economy is stronger than La Plata's, and Brazil's population is also bigger than La Plata's, so unless you're incompetent, you can build up a relatively good military to deal with the threat from the south. And also La Plata has annexed a massive amount of territory. That means that sort of their defensive perimeter is very outstretched. Usually the AI does not have the skills to handle such a front. And once you're done with that, you are going to have Argentina Delenda, or Argentina Delenda, if you want to be more Latin. Essentially, La Plata has been broken. If you have defeated them in a war, you have the option of coming down and taking all of these nice focuses. So these are the ones that everyone can take, from the Liberal Democrats to the Communists and all of that. These ones are going to give you different territories that Argentina has. And yeah, essentially just make puppets. For example, Paraguay becomes your puppet, Uruguay becomes your core. This province, Entre Rios, which is this one, this becomes your core. And you can also take the Malvinas, of course. If you've taken the AIB or the ANL, with the ANL you can get a lot of free war goals against various Latin American countries to sort of spread the revolution. You can say a specter is haunting America. Pretty cool. And if you are the integralists and you have taken the path of the Patria Novista support, you're going to have the option of restoring the empire, which I'll show you right now, because it's kind of interesting. Not really that interesting. It's just you get a different head of state and a different flag and a slightly different color. That's cool, actually. And you'll see. It's, I guess, not that interesting, but it's kind of cool. So I'll show you anyway. And it's just a 7-day focus. So you come down and you can either have Pedro Gastão or Pedro Henrique. It says that Gastão is more inclined towards having like a small constitutional role, whereas Henrique is going to be more intrusive within the government. But I don't really know if there's any differences. Not that like from what I've seen, there's no difference. So as you can see right now, our head of state is Plinio Salgado. Our flag is the integralist little thing. I don't know what you'd call this. And then you say, okay, so the empire is restored, and you switch around from just the AIB to the AIB AIPB, which would be the coalition. Oh, sorry, the Imperial Brazilian Integralist Coalition. And then you get a new head of state. Usually he's pretty handsome, and you're of course still national populist. Then Plínio Salgado becomes your head of government, because, well, now you have an emperor, and then you become the Empire of Brazil, and you have this cool color. This is only possible with the integralists, so yeah. And the rest of the focus tree is very much based upon what happens with here, especially in the economy part. In the economy part, of course, it starts with Black Monday, just like everybody else. Then you have a chance of coming down here and, say, enact some land reform. Again, the oligarchs are very, very much centralizing and ineffectively ruling over the Brazilian agricultural sector. So what you can have is, of course, if you are the syndicalists, you can have, well, just confiscate or set up cooperatives, and yeah, have that kind of solution. And then you can say deal with the corones. The corones are the oligarchs, and these are the northeastern ones, because it's kind of assumed that whatever government you have, these ones are gonna be sort of dealt with. And of course, some of them revolt out in the Civil War anyway. So you're gonna only need to deal with the northeastern ones. Let's see if I have a save with that. Do I have it? Yes, I do. So what happens is that it kind of boils down into a crisis, and there's massive unrest in the northeast. Things are not going the correct way. And you can have either, and yeah, this is kind of weird, but ignore it. For some reason, for some reason the game is thinking that we are syndicalists. So you can either have three options of dealing with them. You can either say call for federal intervention. That's gonna just take away some political power. You can have a coup, which is gonna happen with essentially everyone. And you can say, well, if we sit here long enough, we may reach an agreement, which may end up, I believe, I'm not sure if it's 100% of the time or not, may end up kind of fucking you over. And then after this, this, by the way, only happens if you're taking one of the options of this Limoeiro conference. There's also other ones. For example, you can send in the army. That's going to take away some political power right away, but then give you some bonuses later. So there's just a few things that you can do over here. But yeah, after you've finished up this, you can either say woo them if you are with the right-wingers, and if you are with the totalists and radical syndicalists and all of that, you can, of course, defang them, and everybody can defang them. But this is better because it gives you political, not political power, gives you military factories. So that's pretty good. And with the economy stuff, you have that the socialists and even the social democrats. How can the social democrats come into power? I do not know. Anyway, you have the socialists that can build up a planned economy, and socialism with Brazilian characteristics, because everybody likes this expression. This is actually a lot of factory output, considering that you also have the agricultural cooperatives with 10% factory output, and possibly there was something else that gave you this factory output increase. Yeah, the land reform. So you're going to have +3, +13, +19%, +19% factory output if you have gone with totalists or radical socialists or whatever, and you just take this. So this is actually very strong, which is why the United Communes are probably the strongest of the three, or of the four types of Brazils, just in terms of raw, I guess, game mechanics. So the United Communes are very strong. Or you can have a mixed capital economy, which is going to give you some of this stuff. Hold on. I do definitely remember being able to come down here, even with planned economy. Even though it says that these two require mixed capital economy. Oh no, this one requires one of each. Oh, okay. So with mixed capital economy, you can take joint ventures and heavy-handed interventionism, so more civilian factories and a bit of factory output as well. Socialism with Brazilian characteristics just gives you this, and incentives to our industry ends up giving you some poly-power because you dismantle the unions. Then you come down and take the National Infrastructure Plan, and the cool one is the Paulista Metropolis, because it's 140 days, but it gives you a research slot, so that's pretty cool. And then you get some more free things in there. The military part and, well, actually these two are both the military parts. The military parts are kind of interesting in that it starts by giving you bonuses to radios, which is kind of cool because it's supposed to be like, okay, well, Brazil has like the main cities, but then there's a lack of infrastructure in the countryside with all the jungles and the rough terrain. So of course you need better communication. So that's kind of an interesting little thing. Then you come down and you take a lot of bonuses towards some high-tech stuff that you're probably never going to have enough industrial capacity to build. You have some Air Force things, nothing really too major. The best ones, in my opinion, for the army are the rubber focus, the rubber army, and the National Steel Company over here, 20 steel in Sao Paulo. You're always going to have some problems with steel because at the start you don't really have all that much, only 3. So it's good to have that. And you also get some bonuses towards the different special forces, which is, I guess, fine. Again, supposed to represent that your army is supposed to fight in irregular kinds of conflicts, some bad terrain, so just infantry, not enough. You're going to have special forces. And then you have the other part, which is the Uneasy Peace, which comes down into the Navy sector. The Navy, interestingly enough, has a battleship, which is a residue of the really, really interesting, but I don't have time to look into this, the arms race that happened, or, well, not just the arms race, but mostly the naval race that happened in the early 1900s between Brazil, Argentina, and Chile, which ends up giving essentially South American countries a few of the most modern battleships in the world, commissioned from, well, the British, the US, and I believe the Germans. Let's see if I can switch over to Chile so that I can show you that they also have battleships. They have 2 of them. And then La Plata, will it be Argentina? Yes, it will be Argentina. La Plata also has 3 battleships. I believe 3 because one of them is supposed to be a Brazilian one that they took in the war reparations for the Great Southern American War. Because I believe all these countries, all these Latin American countries, ordered 2 battleships in the 1910s. So before World War I, and some of them were completed, some of them were not. In fact, there's kind of an interesting history about the ones that were not completed, and they were not completed because the World War I started. It's just a long story. I'm not going to go into it. Don't want to get myself sidetracked at all, even though I've already done that. So going back to Brazil, you can improve your navy, which is kind of interesting, and you can have a lot of fortifications against La Plata. But as I said, it's not even that hard of a war. So honestly, getting so much fortifications, not really all that interesting. Like, these are mostly going to be worthless, except fortify the main ports. If you get into trouble with, for example, the Entente or the United States, that can be useful. So that's, I guess, about it. Yeah, I think I've covered it all. So let me know if I've missed something. As always, I want to thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed this guide for Brazil. Well, let's just quickly go over my thoughts. My thoughts on Brazil as a campaign is that it's very fun, very, very fun, especially if you are the integralists or the ANL. The problem with it is that I feel like it's kind of a little bit too similar between all of the different ideologies, all of the different paths, because it's like you're always going to have a civil war. It's always going to be easy to defeat. You're always going to come down and decide, hey, Argentina needs to die. That's, I guess, fine. And then once that's done, only the integralists and the syndicalists get something else to do from the focus tree. So, I mean, it's kind of okay, because you can still kind of set up your own objectives anyway, if you're with Vargas or you're with the Democrats. But yeah, I would mind a little bit more differentiation between these paths. But again, no point in complaining, because it's all pretty fun anyway. So yeah, thank you all for watching. I hope you've enjoyed, and I will see you soon.